from the SDG studio here at UN headquarters in New York. Welcome to this global policy dialogue on new pathways to end poverty amid converging crises. Today, we'll take an in-depth look at the new World Social Report 2024. It's a report by UN DESA, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. The report is being launched officially right after this dialogue. My name is Shakuntala Santharan, Shaks for short. I'll be moderating today's dialogue. Thank you for joining us from your part of the world. We're very glad you can be here. And we'd like to thank the UN Peace and Development Trust Fund for making this event possible. Over the next 75 minutes, we'll delve into the theme of this year's annual World Social Report, which is all about social development in times of converging crises. It calls on everyone invested in the Sustainable Development Goals, and really that's everyone, or should be everyone, to take urgent action to keep the 17 goals in reach. Today, we'll find out what we need to do. What better day to talk about this than today, the annual International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. This day is a reminder that we must keep people at the center of all our sustainable development efforts, including the most vulnerable people. Before we begin, here is some quick housekeeping. If you're watching us on Zoom, multilingual captions are available. Just click on the captioning icon at the bottom of your screen and select the language you'd like. Please help spread what you hear today on social media using the hashtag #EndPoverty. As always, we'd love to hear from you. You'll get a chance to ask our speakers your questions via the online Slido platform. There you can tell us what you want to know and vote up other people's questions. Also share what you think in our audience polls. Just go to slido.com/endpoverty or go to slido.com and insert the hashtag #endpoverty, all one word. Let's try Slido right now with a quick poll of you, our audience, with this question. Do you think people in your part of the world are better off now than they were 30 years ago? Yes, no, or are things about the same? I'll give you a few minutes to vote and get familiar with Slido. Again, just go to slido.com and use the hashtag #endpoverty to take part in the poll. While you're voting, let's take a look at this video now from UN DESA on some of the findings of this year's World Social Reports.
Most countries are now emerging from recent global crises. Those crises have reversed hard-won gains in social development, and recoveries remain incomplete. Poverty rates that first shot up due to the COVID-19 pandemic continue to remain elevated in many low-income countries. In an interlinked world, shocks and crises know no boundaries. Climate shocks alone are imposing massive costs, but the costs of inaction are even greater. Global economic loss between 2020 to 2030 is estimated to be over $50 trillion. People and societies, especially the most vulnerable, are suffering from setbacks in efforts to eradicate poverty, generate employment, reduce inequality, and promote social inclusion.
The importance of poverty alleviation, it's sort of been downgraded within the development frameworks, and to hear that it's actually not supposed to be downgraded, there's still a lot of impacts, especially from these global crises, on the poorest and the most vulnerable. So it's good to get the data that reinforces that. So we look forward to some action.
It appears that crises are here to stay. National efforts remain vital, but won't be enough to achieve social development, as frequent crises wear out coping capacities, particularly in developing countries.
We need multilateral solutions. You cannot expect countries to look at the challenges of hunger, poverty, unemployment in isolation. They will need global support.
Global economic trends are now tending towards positive. So, what can we do to turn around losses in social development and place it on a more secure footing? The World Social Report 2024 has recommendations. Here are 4. Expand social protection into a universal system of coverage. Establish a shared knowledge base for better risk governance. Empower national actions through both immediate and long-term solutions for debt challenges. And strengthen global coordination and the international response to complex global shocks.
The recently adopted Pact for the Future is a strong political commitment to accelerated SDG progress to meet the future needs in a changing world. It commits to close the SDG financing gap and to invest in people and securing ambitious outcomes at the upcoming 4th International Conference on Financing for Development and the 2nd World Summit on Social Development. The World Social Report 2024 helps to lay the groundwork for those deliberations. We invite you to download the report from our website and share your thoughts with us.
We'll find out more about the World Social Report and its findings very soon. First, let's see how you voted. Do you think people in your part of the world are better off now than they were 30 years ago? Wow, 57%, well now 55% of you voting yes, that is encouraging. 36% of you think no, things are about the same or worse off maybe. About the same, 9% of you voting for that. Thank you for casting your votes. Now that you've tried out the Slido platform and hopefully feel more comfortable with it, here is our second poll for you. What do you think is the biggest global crisis we must address to end poverty and ensure social protection? Is it climate change, conflicts, inequality, or is it something else? Now, while you're voting, let me introduce our first panel of experts. Here in the studio with me, Shantanu Mukherjee. He is the Director of the Economic Analysis and Policy Division of DESA. He oversaw the creation of the World Social Report. Joining us virtually from Amherst, Massachusetts is Jayati Ghosh, a development economist and professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She's also a member of the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Economic and Social Affairs. And from Geneva, Switzerland, we're joined by Shahra Razavi, Director of the Universal Social Protection Department at the International Labour Organization. Welcome to you all. Now, we're posting the link for the World Social Report in the chat box on Zoom and Facebook so you can check it out. Before we dive into our conversation, let's find out what you, our viewers, think is the biggest global crisis we must address to end poverty and ensure social protection. Inequality coming up tops with 54% of your vote. Conflicts, 25% of you think are the biggest global crisis we have to address right now. Climate change at 19%. And something else, 5% of our audience think something else needs to be addressed to help end poverty. Thank you again for your votes. What you think matters to us. It is time now to hear from Shantanu, Jayati, and Shahra. If we could start with you, please, Shantanu. So we saw you in that video telling us about some of the World Social Report's findings, including that these converging crises appear to be here to stay, but that global economic trends are tending to the positive. Please tell us more about what this report shows us.
Thank you, Shaks, and hi, Jyoti and Shara. So this is a report that talks about the trend in crises to happen all at once and spark of reactions, if you like, or how they feed upon each other and make things worse, even worse than standalone crises would have. And so what we find in this report initially is a bit of a stock taking. We find that impacts happen at many different levels, through many different channels. So if you're not going to school, there's an education channel. If you're not getting enough to eat, there's a nutrition one. If you've lost work or can't find a way to earn income, that's a third one as well. we also find that these can quickly turn into long-lasting losses. And if you lose the ability to earn income because you're out of work for too long, or because your schooling got interrupted, that's the great example of how a temporary shock can have a lifelong impact on you. And of course, perhaps it's not surprising, given the topic of this report and the audience we have here, that it is actually those who are already disadvantaged who tend to suffer the most, number one, but who also have the steepest hill to climb when you're trying to get out of it. And that depends on both individuals as well as countries in difficult situations. What's new, I think, a little bit going beyond these facts about shocks and crises, is that we have to be ready for the unexpected. So, for example, when these shocks were occurring, they were unexpected to start with, but when something like inflation happened across the world, which was such a blow to the world's poor, to many different communities, that seemed to take a lot of people by surprise. And then sometimes our reactions to help make things better can turn out to have these unexpected side effects. So when we try to tame inflation in a particular country by raising interest rates, for example, that raises the cost of borrowing across the world. And that makes life a lot harder. And these spillover effects, I think, don't always figure in the way we think of these shocks. So that's, in a nutshell, our diagnosis. And we have sort of a number of policy recommendations, but maybe we'll get to that in a bit.
Exactly, Shantanu. Thank you. Now, very briefly, when we spoke earlier, you said that we appear to be emerging from this poly-crisis era.
Yeah. Yes, so that's where it is kind of mixed news. So if you look at the global aggregate, the easy measures such as economic growth rates or inflation, these are all tending towards the positive. And by and large, countries are doing better than they were earlier. So in that sense, we are emerging. We are no longer as worse off as we were, but these gains are really unevenly distributed. And countries that should be growing much faster because they're starting off at low levels of economic well-being to start with are not growing as fast as they should. Countries are overburdened with debt and are finding it difficult to pay it off. So I think one of the things we want to say in this report is that things are a little bit better. But let's take advantage of these good times, relatively good times, to actually get together and prepare for a future where shocks like this might happen once again.
Thank you, Shantanu. Jayati, what do you think of what Shantanu has shared with us thus far and of the findings of this report?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, Shaks, for organizing this, and Shantanu, thank you for that very excellent summary. You know, I'm going to, from the outside, as somebody who is a great appreciator of UN DESA's work in general and this report as well, I think what's really important here is, in a way, between the lines. For me, the main message of the report is not so much that we're recovering from crisis, as that a very large part of the world population still remains in very deep crisis. In fact, not even just in relative instability and so on, but that many of the gains that were made in poverty have been reversed. Food access is an issue. Social protection is a very big issue. All of those you mentioned. And in a way, to me, the main message of the report really is that all of the things that the global community has been doing have not worked and are not working, and that we really need a change of direction. So in a sense, I think I'm putting out what I think you're saying, and you kind of hint at it, but essentially the message for the report for me is that we absolutely have to change track.
We are going to talk about what you think needs to change a little later. Do you think we are making progress, though, Jayati, overall? Have we made progress since the Copenhagen World Summit in 1995?
Oh, yes, definitely. If you're going to talk that long ago, we certainly have made progress since then. But that's a very long time ago. I think we made 2 decades of progress, and then subsequently we've had setbacks. And particularly since 2019, we've experienced setbacks in global hunger and global poverty. and in global social protection, for sure.
Thanks, Jayati. Shahra, what do you think of this report and what Shantanu and Jayati have been saying?
Yeah, I also want to congratulate Shantanu for the report. Sorry, I'm hearing an echo and I don't know whether... Yeah, so what I wanted to say is really that the report is very good. It zooms in on the problems and the issues that we have to tackle, where I think I kind of also, maybe it's a bit reading between the lines, but I think this kind of situation of perpetual crisis that we have, I would agree with Jayati. It's partly a reflection of the fact that what we're doing may be taking us along a little bit. I mean, we see a bit of progress on social protection. We've just come out with the new data, and since 2015, yes, there has been some progress despite all odds, but we're certainly not where we need to be. And I think that whole theme of inequality, which came out in your in what the viewers thought, is also one that is really making any progress that we make highly uneven. And I think one of the big issues is that these inequalities are also in a way kind of causing and contributing to the perpetual crisis that we have. So let me leave it here for now, and we can continue the conversation.
Shahra, I wanted to ask you more about your work and what it shows about where we stand with social protection, because that's so very crucial, isn't it, for all of us, and especially so for people living in poverty.
Yeah, thanks for zooming in on that. I mean, as I said, we do see some progress. I mean, in 2015, we had about 43% of the global population that had coverage. And in the latest report that we just put out, that percentage has gone up to about 52%. So there is some progress, but across regions, very different picture. In Africa, we still are only 19% of the population has, some form of coverage. And this is not saying anything about the adequacy. So what this means is if you get a little cash benefit, this kind of counts as being covered. But we know that very often the benefits that people get are inadequate, and particularly with the cost of living crisis, what we have really seen is that the value of any benefits that people get through social protection has kind of melted, like, snowball on a summer day, because that adequacy has really been eroded, with the exception of some of the countries where they had a method of indexation where the benefits could keep up with, the cost of living. But that's not across the board. We don't have adequacy for all of the risks that we face across the life cycle, particularly when it comes to, not being able to find work, unemployment. There's very little protection. On average, even across the world, protection for unemployment is about 1 out of, 5 persons who are unemployed have some form of income security that they can rely on, some form of social protection. But that percentage, really goes down to almost insignificant figures in many developing regions. But one thing I do want to say in particular, I know that the climate crisis did not come up as a major concern for some of your audience. But that is really an existential crisis. And what we found by looking at the 20 most vulnerable countries, vulnerable to climate crises, many of them are in the tropics. Those are the countries where you have social protection coverage that's, closer to like 8-9% of the population. So what we're basically saying is that where the climate crisis is going to hit, many of them are countries that have contributed very little to the climate crisis, and yet they're suffering the double injustice of having contributed very little and yet not having the coverage. And as we know, part of it has to do with underinvestment, which again has, global reasons for it. The debt crisis is not a national thing. It's happening in so many countries. There are global mechanisms at place that put these countries in such a difficult position. So we really need, some form of global coordination. We cannot just cause problems for low-income countries, at a global level through many of the problems that I'm sure both Shantanu and Jayati will be talking about, and yet not provide any solutions at the global level that can, really help these countries mobilize their own resources and make their investments.
How important is the gender component in alleviating poverty? Jayati, if we could come to you first on that.
It's huge. The gender component is, I think Shara also will have a lot to say about this, but we find that there are very significant gender gaps, certainly in employment and your ability to keep your livelihood, particularly during any kind of crisis, an economic shock, a climate crisis, a financial crisis. We also find that women in general receive significantly less earnings for their work, whether it is in paid work or self-employment. But we find now that there are massive gender gaps even in social protection. I think there's a recent report by UN Women that shows very large gender gaps, even just in the provision of social protection, while in fact women should be getting more, simply because they are responsible for so much of household social provisioning, of so much care and social reproduction, and that they require the social protection much more. So yes, gender gaps are massive in all of these, and we know that women are differentially affected, but also that many of these strategies that are devised by governments to deal with them, I won't say they're gender blind so much as that they are gender exploitative. They exploit the fact that women will keep providing the unpaid labor and so on, and therefore add to the double burden that many women experience while they are not getting any of the benefits. So exactly what Shara was saying about countries that did not contribute to a crisis being at the receiving end of them, similarly we find that that same thing plays out in terms of gender relations in most of our countries.
Shara, what do you think? You specialize in gender and social development.
Yeah, I would say, I totally agree with what Jayati has said. The data that we have now, social protection data was not available disaggregated by sex. And this was the first time that we were able to put the global data together, which I'm very happy that UN Women also used. And what it shows is indeed what Jayati said. There is a significant gender gap globally and in all sort of regions and countries that we see. In particular for pensions, we have very good data. And what we see is also women tend to receive, relatively speaking, more in terms of social assistance, tax finance, social assistance. But when it comes to social insurance, where levels of benefits tend to be more adequate, that's where women are penalized because of where they are in the labor market. They're often in informal work. They have interrupted careers. So having social assistance and expanding social assistance, tax finance social assistance, so that women can have some benefits that they can rely on is a positive thing. That is definitely a positive thing that has been happening over the past, a couple of decades, particularly in Latin America, but also many other regions. And yet we still have this difference that women are often at a disadvantage when it comes to more adequate forms of benefit. If you care for your elderly parent or your child and you leave the labor market, you get penalized, particularly where your pension system is kind of more privatized and doesn't allow for redistribution within the system. So that's a real problem.
Yeah, this year's gender snapshot by UN DESA and UN Women shows that it'll take, at the rate we're going, 137 years to eradicate extreme poverty among women and girls. Did you want to add to this, Shantanu?
Oh, I just wanted to say that I completely agree that this is one of the most intractable issues. And it's intractable because a lot of it, when we talk of poverty or when you talk to many people, there's a feeling that the market or some support through the market or connecting to market will take care of many of these things. And a lot of poverty-related strategies are based on that. They're based on boosting income through somehow connecting to the market. And that has worked to some extent, as Jyoti said. In 1995, I think 1 in 3 was in extreme poverty. And recently, of course, these numbers have been fluctuating, going up, but now it's been below 1 in 10 for some time. But on the other hand, a lot of the work that women do is happening kind of outside the market. And unless that's really going into the way you think in the entirety of how women spend their time, you are really not doing things that are going to be helping them get out of it. Back in 1995, the Copenhagen Declaration already talked about the feminization of poverty. And that's still very much here, even though the extreme poverty rate has fallen. So it's an indication of how this care work at home, other implied assumptions about the roles of women, really gets in the way of addressing or elevating some issues, women's economic empowerment as a whole.
We saw earlier what our audience thinks is the biggest global crisis that should be addressed, right, to help reduce poverty and ensure social protection. Is there one big crisis we must focus on, or must we tackle all this simultaneously? Because they are interconnected.
No, you're absolutely right. They're all interconnected, and each kind of feeds into the other. And for the person who is really at the receiving end, it's hard to tell where exactly the shock is coming from sometimes. But if I look at some of the suggestions you put out there, and I say that, well, what might be a little bit more tractable to address right away, and what might be very hard? Shara mentioned climate change, and I think if you look at the most recent CO2 emissions data in the atmosphere, we have already entered or are close to approaching the lower bound, beyond which, just from a scientific basis, that 1.5 degrees Celsius target will start slipping out of reach. Even at this level, we are seeing the level of the shocks. And the real challenge, of course, is that these shocks can compound each other and happen at the same time. So it is possible to think of a shock now, probably even, that hits two grain-producing exporting areas at the same time. And we already see how difficult it is to maintain nutrition levels, what the prices do there. So this is, I think, perhaps is not playing out in full as yet, but is, I would say, one of the hardest challenges that we are facing. On the other hand, because it does affect everybody, there are vested interests and there are entrenched stakes here. Perhaps there is a way to address this more directly in a way that will show some results going forward. Inequality in countries is, of course, terribly important too. But somebody benefits from an unequal situation in every country, and it's the person who's in the top part of the income distribution, right? And that becomes a vested interest in itself to hold back progress. We have to do things about it. But perhaps on the climate side, because everyone is being affected severely, there may be a mobilization possible that takes us forward. That's just me thinking off the top of my head.
Jayati, you were talking about the need for change earlier. What needs to change?
Wow. Yes, so many things. But I'm going to pick up on a point that Shantanu just made in terms of inequality and vested interests. And, we actually underestimate the extent to which vested interests operate, not just in terms of the policies that are implemented, the processes that occur, but even our public perception of them. So let's take food prices, okay? This dramatic increase in food prices that we had in 2022, and to a lesser extent, but still significant in 2023. Global food prices zoomed up, and everybody says, oh, it's the Ukraine war, and then it's also climate change affecting crops and so on. Actually, global food production increased, and it was bigger than global demand for food. So what was going on? It was actually profiteering by large agribusiness that controls 85% of the global market, and financial speculation in commodity markets. Somebody is benefiting. And yet the media portrayal was entirely that it is these supply shocks, and we all fall for that. And that's part of the inequality that we have to stop. I think similarly, so much instability is created by financial flows. So the US raises interest rates, and bam, all kinds of countries who have not had irresponsible macroeconomic policies at all. They've just been hit by the pandemic and other things like that. They have capital outflows, and then their currencies depreciate. So when global food prices fall, their food prices continue to increase. The lowest income countries, their food prices increased by 30% when global food prices fell by 13%. That's what we're talking about. So, in other words, these are things that are not, shall we say, nature given. These are not even climate change. These are problems in our international architecture that we can fix with political will. The problem, therefore, is the inadequate political will and the fact that people around don't know enough about it to demand that this be changed.
Shahra, I can see you nodding. What do you think we need to move this needle in the direction we need it to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to have some kind of counterbalancing forces. And the fact that, we're living in a world where, for example, trade unions that had a lot of voice and could counter some of the vested interests that have led to the kind of policies and mechanisms which are creating these global and national inequalities. The fact that, workforces are informalizing, the fact that unions are less powerful, there's less voice for them. I think that kind of really is what's contributing to the fact that we don't have the kind of political balance that is needed to put a bit the public interest ahead of private interests and corporate profits. So there is this kind of balancing act that I think needs to be done. I mean, we're all hopeful that we will have stronger social movements, stronger unions, stronger kind of really partnerships to push forward a more human-centered agenda that can create, not only is it about kind of realizing all the rights, and all the SDGs, it's also actually economically a more sustainable possibilities for a more sustainable economy. So I don't think it's very helpful to say, it has been about economic efficiency and growth versus, inequality and poverty. I mean, the economy in terms of investments in real investments rather than just financial markets growing in a way that puts the whole real economy in jeopardy. I think we need to move away from the kind of economic policies that have made it possible for not only for profits to grow, but also for the interest of the majority and of a healthy economy to be put in jeopardy. We talk a lot about it, the 1% and so forth, and yet, the policies that are needed to change things are not happening sufficiently. And I think at the end of the day, it's an issue of politics and of what's happening at the national level and global level. Who has the voice? Who doesn't? I think it does have a big element to do with that.
I have a very quick question before we take some audience questions. Shantanu, well, for all of you, what should people do with this information, with this report? What can we do if we're not policymakers?
That's a good question. I think my very short answer would be influence the policymakers. Use the evidence we have here. Recognize that it is a struggle. It's not something that will be just provided gratis, as you were. And, there's a wonderful book which I wholeheartedly recommend called Under the Bus, and that's written by a legal scholar, Caroline Fredrickson. And she talks about the US situation where, well-meaning activists and hardworking people who were lobbying for change took for granted some of the legal provisions that had been grandfathered in, but which were basically exclusionary. And how difficult it was in this system, even when all of the positive forces were there to effect change, to actually figure out that the inherited laws, inherited institutions, and inherited mechanisms meant to be equalizing, carried within them these exclusionary provisions. So I would say, I think that's a sign of how difficult the struggle is. But I think the progress that has been made and the sudden changes we see in different countries are also a sign that change can take place unobtrusively and it can become manifest.
So we have to keep at it and not give up. Jayati, what should people do with all this information?
Okay, so two levels of answer to this question. First of all, if to plug another book, a book I was involved in, it's called Earth for All, and it is a report to the Club of Rome, 50 years after the first Club of Rome report called Limits to Growth. So it's a joint collaboration between scientists, social scientists, and others. Earth for All. It's basically saying if we are to save the planet and ourselves, we have to have 5 major turnarounds. We have to eliminate poverty, reduce inequality, transform our food systems, empower women and marginalized groups, and regenerate and regreen the energy sector, basically, okay? So there are these 5 turnarounds. Obviously, these have to happen at every level. And so we talk about the different measures that are required internationally, nationally, and even locally. And we talk about how citizens can lobby for specific things, depending on where they are and what they can do. So broadly, there are different roadmaps, of course, out there, but this is one of them that I personally think has a lot of potential. And the other level of answer to that question, if I had to think of one space in the multilateral arena that currently gives me some hope, it is the sphere of taxation. This is mentioned in Shantanu's report. They talk about the potential for progressive taxation, but we have for the first time serious negotiations going on in the UN for moving towards a UN tax convention that is going to cover a whole range of issues. So, for example, wealth taxation, the taxation of the extremely wealthy, let's say the 0.1 or 0.001% of our population. If you tax them even 2% of their wealth, in the form of income tax or in the form of wealth tax, anything, you get, often in many countries, you get 1 or 2% of GDP. Massive amounts. In India, that would double the entire health spending of the government. So we can actually move towards a system that pushes for more equality, at the same time provides very essential resources to governments. So I think taxation is one of those areas where too often citizens just say, oh my God, we can't handle it. It's too complex, it's too technical, and it's boring. It's not boring, it's political. And we really have to fight for more progressive taxation. There are moves to try and make multinationals pay the same rate of tax as domestic companies, which can be done. There are moves to tax the extremely wealthy, but these will only happen if governments get pushed by the people. Because the governments are getting pushed on one side by the elites, right? By the rich and by the big corporations. They have to be pushed on the other side by people.
Shara, what can we do if we're not policymakers? Very quickly.
Very quickly, I would say maybe just one perspective to add is, we often say we need to address policymakers, and I think that's important. We do need to address policymakers, but addressing, policy shapers and policy shakers, if you like, is also important. We also need to talk, to the civil society organizations, to the trade unions, to other associations, because they also talk to policymakers, and that I think is important. If we get the kind of evidence, the kind of knowledge that we have into the hands of all citizens, I think that is a step in the right direction. And I think I'm also, like Jayati, a bit optimistic about some of the debates and some of the movements that have happened around taxation recently. Having Brazil in the G20 has been very important too in adding to that. Having the Africa group, the Latin American countries coming together around a global convention, a UN convention on taxation, and really trying to move this debate and this discussion forward. I think there is a lot of optimism, and we hope that in the Financing for Development conference that's coming up, we will see some changes, some positive changes in that respect.
Let's get an audience question now. We could pull those up for you. Here we go. How can we ensure that those who don't have a seat at the table, the most vulnerable, are represented in the policy discussion? This question from Amina Zia here in Asheville, here in the US. Shantanu, do you want to take that?
Well, I think both Jayati and Shara spoke about it, so maybe they'd be better equipped. I can take the next one.
Ladies, how do we ensure that people who don't have a voice are represented in policy discussions?
This is so difficult because, I think what Shara said is absolutely true. We have to be talking to the people who can talk to people on the ground, who can mobilize, who can generate awareness, who can create public issues and demand for certain things. But, there is this other problem that I'm increasingly finding in a lot of the international spaces. And that is that civil society is invited in, but mainly it's like a bit of a pressure cooker lid. You put them in and you allow them to vent, and you don't necessarily listen to what they say. And I find this over and over again. I find that we are kind of brought into spaces, or civil society organizations, NGOs, trade unions, movements are brought in. They spend a lot of time and energy thinking about these issues. And yet, finally, when it comes to the essential decisions, they don't get much of a voice. A friend of mine who is deeply involved in the Brazilian G20 stuff, they have been going crazy. They have so many different groups that have been providing inputs, and they've really worked very hard and provided excellent discussions. What's in the final document is closer to what the Business 20 wanted, rather than all the other popular groups. So, yeah, there's a problem there.
Shara, do you want to add to that quickly? Quickly again.
No, I think that is this idea of consulting and having civil society or NGOs, social movements at the table. I think sometimes we really need to watch out for that, because it creates this illusion that there is participation. But, this kind of consultation doesn't really come with proper accountability and answerability. I have to say, and I think Jayati gave a beautiful speech at the International Labour Conference this year in Geneva. I think ILO has some unique features in that there is a real tripartism with labor organizations, workers' organizations and employers' organizations, together with governments, having that capacity and that voice and real space and presence in the institution. And I think we need more of that social dialogue that is really inclusive and that has inbuilt accountability and is not just kind of inviting NGOs to vent, and then what kind of comes out of it really doesn't reflect a lot of what was said. So I think we need to push for greater accountability on the part of powerful institutions. And that's not only the UN, of course.
And move beyond token representation. There's so much more to talk about. We have so many other audience questions, but we do have to wrap up. I mean, these are huge, complex issues. Shantanu, Jayati and Shara, thank you so very much for your vital insights and for all that you are doing. Now let's turn our attention to the focus of this year's International Day for Poverty Eradication, which is about ending the social and institutional maltreatment experienced by people living in poverty. Yes, we have SDG 1, no poverty, as one of the global goals, but poverty is a cross-cutting issue that affects all 17 goals, including SDG 16 for fair, peaceful, and inclusive societies. Poverty is certainly not fair, and it's not peaceful. So let's poll you once again. What do you think is the best way to reduce the stigma of living in poverty? Is it by increasing education about the causes of poverty? Is it creating more opportunities for dialogue, or providing services based on compassion and respect? Creating new terminologies, or is it something else? While you're casting your vote, let's watch this video now on why we must end hunger and poverty everywhere.
Your dignity is tied to every other human being on Earth. When millions of us struggle to survive, human energy is diminished. When so many of us are still hungry, human potential is suffocated. Poverty has many forms, but no borders. To become fully human, we must free ourselves from the tyranny of poverty and from the grip of hunger everywhere. As we end poverty, true prosperity begins. As we end hunger, we all start to flourish. We have the ability, means, and capacity to create a world where all humans have dignity and our potential is fully realized. This is the story you are shaping.
Yes, let's keep striving together to end hunger and poverty and realize our full potential. So, how did you vote in our last poll? What do you think is the best way to reduce the stigma of living in poverty? Here we go. 44% think we need to improve education about the causes of poverty. 17% think we need more services based on compassion and respect. Something else, say 16% of our audience, we have to create more opportunities for dialogue, according to 13% of our audience, and we need to create new terminologies, say 8% of our audience. Well, here with me now to talk about this, we have Marianne Broxton, the main representative to the UN of anti-poverty NGO ATD Fourth World. It's an international social movement working alongside and in collaboration with people in poverty. Also here with us, Nancy Santos, the Assistant Director of Project Access at Roxbury Community College in Boston, Massachusetts. And Project Access works to help people from less advantaged backgrounds stay in higher education. Welcome, ladies, and thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. ATD Fourth World and Project Access are partners,
Yes.
right? We were talking about how to get more voices at the table, and that's one reason why ATD Fourth World works so closely with community-based organizations, right, to get more voices from the ground at that table. We're going to be talking about that shortly. First, though, we saw what our audience thinks we need, right, to help eradicate poverty, well, to eliminate stigma, rather, for people living in poverty. Let's talk about that stigma first. Nancy, you were telling me that the students you work with face so much stigma when they're identified as being hungry and struggling.
They do. And a lot of students come into the office to talk to us, and they eventually share some of the challenges they're facing, and they do feel ashamed to say that they are hungry. And we really work hard with them to let them know that, you know, we're there for them and it's okay. So I really liked it when one of the polls said reducing the stigma, because it should not be ashamed of that. And we know that housing insecurity and food insecurity really impact your academic success. So our department likes to work with the students so that we can eliminate that and allow them to go on and be successful. And just having the dialogue and beginning to talk about it and acknowledge that the problem exists is the first step, because we don't want to make the student feel guilty for being in that situation when oftentimes it's totally out of their hands. It's a systemic problem that is not just on our campus, but we find it on campuses across the world. So that we get the students in, and while they're in, when these challenges come, it's very hard for them to move forward. And so we really work towards eliminating that.
We're going to talk about what Project Access does very shortly. You talked about this stigma being a systemic problem. It is perpetuated by individuals in society, but not just that, because it's also in institutions, in some public services, and government policies, right, Marianne?
Yes, very much so. That's why we're very excited about this year's theme for the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, ending social and institutional maltreatment, because it's circular. Society will have a view of people that do not have as much as everybody else does, or lower income levels, and that view kind of influences policy. Policy can also influence society's views of people, and so, example, too often the idea is that people in poverty, if you just worked harder, if you had better morals, you would not be in poverty. So it's very much your fault, without looking at the institutions themselves that create policies that perpetuate it for people. So that's why we're very happy about this year. But there is a lot when we talk about food insecurity. The example of, in the United States, the program that we have only gives people that do qualify, if they jump through the hoops to qualify for it, $6 per day per person to buy food. And that's, again, if they qualify for the full amount. When we look at housing, who has access to housing, what you have to do to qualify for it. And a lot of these things, the policy is based on the perception of people, not based on anything that they do, but just personally, but just a perception. When we did our research, the hidden dimensions of poverty in global research, in the US, we came up with the dimension subjugation. And when we talked about that, it relies heavily on that, how a dominant group of people perceive another group of people. Again, not because of their actions, but just because we deem you as the other. And therefore, we deny you access to resources, healthcare, rights, voice, humanity. So all of these things are related to policy and the stigma that comes with it, and from social also.
I mean, the stigma can be perpetuated even in the language used in these policies, right? Saying that a service is on the front line, referring to a home as a unit versus a home, that can cause stigma as well. What does this kind of maltreatment and living in poverty do to someone, Nancy?
It does a lot with their own self-esteem. And like you said, with Project Access, we deal with the non-academic challenges because we know that people want to be able to provide for their families. And getting a good college education is the first, it's very important. That's a step in getting there. So after a lot of studies were done, several studies years ago, they just saw how prevalent food insecurity is in college students, so that while they are in college, there are a lot of students who are hungry. So several years ago, Dean Carter, the Dean of Students, Dean Carter, was working with a group, a coalition that we sit on with all the community colleges across the state. And we decided to take a look at not only the numbers that were provided to us, but to take a look at our students and to go in and issue a survey for them to freely answer how they felt. And the results were alarming. There were 60% of the students said that they were worried about where their next meal was coming from. And within the leading up to the survey, within the few months prior, 28% of them said that they worried that their money would not sustain them until they could get more money to buy food. And several said that they did not eat balanced meals because they weren't available. So it was looked at like, what could we do? So that's how the idea of a food pantry started. And we have the support of our current administration, but in the interim, we had a working group and we decided to look at what could we do at Roxbury Community College and Project Access so that we have a food pantry. And we had a naming contest with the students of the college because we thought that they were ashamed to say food pantry, so they named it, and it's called the Rocks Box. So we make it seem like you're just, you're hanging out, it's a place to go. No one is pointing fingers at anyone else. You go in and you're able to select what you want off the shelves rather than pre-packaged meals that may not go with your family. We try to find culturally sensitive items in the pantry as well, and just to let students know that yes, there's hope for you, and we're here. It's a beginning. We advocate for additional resources in the community for them as well, and we look for partners to help us. And so I think when people begin to look at a small change and work within your community, that's very important, because the community is Roxbury Community College. We're a part of the community. We want to empower our community.
Nancy, yes, did you want to add?
Yes, I just want to add, as Nancy was just saying, that they chose to name it the Rocks Box. And that's very important when we come down to stigma. And you were saying, like, housing, they call it a unit. The way society does it also, when we talk about people that are I hear it a lot. Unfortunately, I hear it here a lot too, is where we say the poor, opposed to people living in poverty. Because once you start labeling a person as the poor or the homeless, we immediately objectify them, and then it makes it easier to marginalize them. So language is a huge part of how stigma becomes acceptable, just in simple terms that we use every day, unconsciously or consciously. I think in little things can help along the way for people.
You were telling us a little bit about how you help students discreetly, because that helps them maintain their sense of dignity, right?
Yes, everything we do is confidential, and sometimes a student might come in for maybe just a T-pass and transportation, and because the way we feel we advocate for the students, then they begin to unpack other issues they have, and some of them are they run deep, and it didn't just begin. They brought it in with them. And we have a college that is 53% of our students are female. So the woman being the caretaker and provider in the home, they have additional challenges. So there is childcare. If you don't have childcare, then it's hard for you to get to class. We partner with a company who distributes personal hygiene products, because those are things that are not covered with government funding. We provide those items. We have diapers for some of our students who are parents. So we thoughtfully and intentionally looked at different things we have going on. We have students who are housing insecure, so we have different items in the pantry that might better suit their needs, and discreetly, so that we don't disclose. No one knows what anyone else is doing or what their circumstance is. We believe in that, and to serve them with dignity is very important to us.
Can you share a quick success story with us of someone who has been helped by Project Access?
Well, we had a student come in, and they, well, I don't know how to say this, but they came in, and it was like 2 minutes before 5 o'clock. And a woman came in, and she had a small child with her. So my colleague and I were getting ready, because it was Friday afternoon, and she came in and disclosed that she'd been waiting to be placed into housing, and she wasn't successful, and she didn't know where to go. So we looked at each other, and we took off our coats, and we just each took a phone, and we started calling. We started trying to find places to go. We made sure, did she need diapers? Did she need anything else? How was she doing to take with her? And we were able to find a place to place her. But those are the kind of things that we do, because that is our heart to serve. We have students who come in who perhaps their benefits have stopped due to clerical error, and they are without food, and we're open 2 days a week, but we'll open at any time, and we go and we give them food, we give them resources where else to go, and we want them to know that they are not alone, that there's someone that's in it with them, in it to win it. And so we work with them, and we love those stories. We don't think we're doing anything extraordinary, so I'm happy to have this time to talk about it. We feel that it's just a common, it's humane that you want to help people. We want everyone to have that attitude, because yes, you may have, but you never know. One day you could be in a similar circumstance, and so we're there for the students.
So very encouraging and motivating and inspiring. How important, Marian, is it that policymakers, decision makers remember human dignity when they're making these decisions? How do they do that?
I heard your guest earlier that was saying that, talking about NGOs and being there. I think you need to have people at the table to be part of these conversations. Not just in the US, we have the saying, but from Shirley Chisholm, if you're not invited to the table, bring your own chair. But once you get there, you cannot be the centerpiece. You know, the pretty thing that's sitting there that people talk over and around, you need to be fully part of the conversation, talking about design, implementation, and critical review. If we don't have people at the table, or policymakers listening to people, we're only going to get partial knowledge, and we will never get policies that actually work. Another thing is will. We really need to have the will.
Political will?
Yes, because we say we want to achieve the SDGs. Of course we do. We want to end poverty everywhere in all its forms, but we have to actually have the will to say what we're going to do. And they were talking about accountability earlier, that we need to have accountability. When we say that we are going to ensure that everybody has food or has access to food, is treated with dignity. One of the ways you treat people with dignity is to listen to them and let them speak. I'm the main representative to the United Nations. My main job is to represent the priorities of ATD Fourth World, but I also see my main job is to bring people there and speak, not to speak for them. That's why we have Project Access speaking today at IDEP, as to serve as an example of what an institutional good looks like. We brought guests with us today that will also be speaking, because the UN is their house. They should also be speaking, their voices should be heard, and people should be there listening to them, because they can solve the issues that you have, because they know how policy works in actuality, opposed to how it's supposed to work on paper.
And move past the token representation.
Exactly.
Right? So Project Access is a 3-person operation.
Yes.
You work on grants, and you're making such a difference in these students' lives. So you're a shining example for me, certainly, that we can all make a difference.
Thank you.
What is your advice, suggestions for people like myself? What can we do now to contribute to help make the world a fairer and better place?
Well, first of all, to let you know, the Rocks Box, our mission is feeding one mouth at a time until there is no need. And I think having a dialogue is the most important thing, and acknowledging that this does exist. And I challenge people to take a look in their own community, so that you might go family by family, neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community. And when we all band together and begin to find and put together our resources, I think we can work to eradicate poverty and to eliminate the stigma, because it becomes something that is just not a one person or a 3-team. It branches out into the community. So that's my big thing. And for institutions to listen. They must listen and make resources. Perhaps you have to look at the cost of colleges. You have to think about increasing the benefits for food. Like you said, the food, it doesn't last. I mean, there are so many other things that we can think of to do. So I think just the dialogue is very important, and people to listen and to look around your neighborhood and to see and put a face, not just statistics. We do a lot of research, but look at it as an individual and the person. That's very important.
There's a human being behind each of those numbers.
Yes.
Marianne, what can we all do?
Listen to people, but also partner with them and follow their lead. A lot of times when we have policymakers or NGOs or nonprofits or think tanks, they look for people that will fit their agenda. You need to do it, flip it around and do it the other way. You need to listen to people and base your agenda off of that. Because exactly, again, like as I said, people that, Nancy said, live in the communities, people that work, their lives are dictated basically by these policies. You need to listen to them because they have the experience and they know how it works, what would work better, and to seek them out. You have to also build trust, because if you're going into the neighborhood, just parachuting into the neighborhood, into the community, into the country, as an NGO or a policymaker or however, people have been burnt before. They figure you're coming here, I'm going to tell you it's extraction, you're going to turn it into what you think is right and what you think we need, opposed to listening to our needs. And that's the programs that you design that way will never be successful, because if the community is not invested in it to begin with, it will eventually fail when they leave. So that's why you need to take the time to build trust with people. So that way, you know, I'm telling you the actual truth, opposed to me telling you what I think you want me to say, what you want to hear. And again, that solution will not be totally successful either. Again, listen to people, build trust, follow their agenda, follow their lead. Don't be afraid, be brave to see what people want and say, okay, we're going to try it your way for a change.
Bravo, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, let's see what our audience wants to know. Here we've got a question from Shataya in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. As persons with disabilities disproportionately impacted by the crises, what are mechanisms to ensure their inclusion? Ladies, any thoughts on that question? How do we include people with disabilities more?
Let's make everything accessible. During COVID, people were very happy that they were able to work from home online. The people that were fortunate enough to have access to be online. Now that everybody is saying COVID is over, they're going back to the office. That was the first time people that had disability and that had access were able to fully participate, because they didn't need to worry about travel. They didn't need to worry about, how am I going to get back and forth? And it's not just about disabilities. When we talk about poverty, I say it's ageist, sexist, racist, and ableist. All, because everything intersects. When we talk, the same issues that people with disabilities are facing are the same issues that women face, people of color. When I say not just the issues, but the difficulties, the roadblocks that people put in front of them. It needs to be full inclusion, it needs to be equity. And again, if you were sitting in a place and you have access to that place, and you know that there's a person with a disability, a woman, an older person, a younger person also needs to be sitting at that table. Share your space so they can be there too and talk about the issues, because they all intersect. So I would say share the space, to demand it, not only to share it, but to demand it. Where are these other groups not sitting at this table with us?
Nancy, did you want to add to that?
I did, just quickly to add that we're very fortunate at our college that we have an assistant dean of accessibility, so that we change the stigma by not saying disability, we say accessibility. So it can be, accessibility can be academic, or it could be a physical challenge, so that we have a department and Title IX, he's also with Title IX, that the students can go and they can have help, and I think that that's a very important thing as well. So we changed it by not saying disability, it's accessibility, and we offer services for the students as well to help them in whatever area they may need that little extra support.
Let's squeeze in one more audience question, if we can. What strategies for community engagement and mobilize non-traditional resources to end poverty? This question is from John Edie in Nigeria. Marianne, I think, how do we get the community involved?
Again,
let's go with that.
Again, it all comes down to partnerships, building trust, working with people. There are so many community-based organizations that are on the ground. If you listen to them, if you build the trust, again, demand, why aren't they at this table? Whose agenda are you following? Are you looking for people to fit into yours? Once you build that trust, they will want to share with you more and tell you, like, this is how we can work together and build from there.
How does Project Access do any community outreach?
We do. And so community partners and stakeholders are very important to us being successful. And I think that that means you have to know your community. So like she was saying, it's one thing for us to tell people what they need, but it's another thing to listen. And we ask our students, what else can we do? So we have partnerships with legal services and legal clinics as well. So that's just knowing your area and your community help you, I would think, to do that. So community engagement is important, and just to see what's out there, and even to engage with your local politicians. Invite them on campus to see what you do. Take your students out to see what's going on. All those types of things make a big difference. So,
any thoughts on non-traditional resources that John was asking about in his question? Are there any non-traditional resources, thinking outside the box, right? We need to think beyond what we've been doing already, well, things that haven't been working.
When we talk about non-traditional, usually we assume, well, we know people need housing, people need access to clean water, all these things, but they also need opportunity. You know, if you need to have employment, you're also going to need childcare. You're also going to need transportation. We need to, instead of non-traditional, I say we need to think of it as holistic. You know, when we were doing the research for the hidden dimensions of poverty, where the actual, the social maltreatment and institutional maltreatment were two of the dimensions that were named, one of the academics that was taking part of the research saying, you know, this research made me think of not just a unit as a number, but as a person, and everything that that person may need as far as, again, childcare, housing. Do we need interpretation to be able to listen to conversations? Do they need transportation? How is their internet and their access to be able to participate? To think of the person themselves, and they said it changed everything, that their way of working completely, because it wasn't so siloed anymore. Because we know all of these, as you said at the beginning of this program, that the SDGs, poverty is entwined between every single one of them. It's the same way in people's lives. We are not just one-dimensional people. We don't live in silos. The approaches to poverty and the way we work with people can't also be siloed. We need to think of a whole person, everything that touches their life, and what they need help with in a way, or more so too, what they need support with. I would also say the number one thing that they need is people have agency. They know what they need. Listen to them, recognize their voice, and when they tell you their truth, believe them. Don't say, well, I have statistics that show otherwise, or I can back that up with numbers that show otherwise. When they tell you their truth, believe them. So these are non-traditional things to go away about it, and it ends up being more holistic, and you achieve more that way.
And do you want to add quickly?
Well, quickly to add on, to jump onto that, is Project Access under Dean Carter's leadership. It's a holistic approach. And I think the main thing is we don't have a model, so we don't say when you come in, we can give you this, 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 and this. We're not afraid to find other ways to do it that may be unconventional, but that are successful in the end, and we treat the whole student and whatever they need. So it's not just saying one thing, it's realizing and looking each person. We can't paint everyone with the same brush. Each student has a different need, and we're able to work with it, whatever it takes.
One student at a time.
That's right.
Ladies, thank you so very much. Marianne, Nancy, thank you for sharing your vital work, your experience with us, and for all that you're doing to help end poverty. I wish we could keep talking, but we have to leave it there for now. Thanks also to you, our audience, for your participation. I certainly learned so much today listening to our speakers. I hope you did too. If you want to explore the World Social Report 2024 in more depth, you'll find it at un.org/DESA. If you're on Facebook or Zoom, we're putting the link for the report in the chat box once again. You'll also see an exit survey pop up when you leave the Zoom meeting. Please do fill that out. We'd really appreciate your feedback, as it helps us plan future events for you. You're also welcome to watch the official UN commemoration of the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. Nancy and Marianne will be there, which will be streaming live today on UN Web TV at 1:15 p.m. New York time. That's in about 2 hours. That's at webtv.un.org. Many thanks once again to all our brilliant speakers, and to you for tuning in, and to our colleagues at UN DESA for coordinating everything. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night, depending on where you are in the world. From me and the rest of the team here at the SDG studio, goodbye now.